professionals.
Holding.
Hi, my name is Holding. I just want to ask, I think where the change can start, in the sense that I think a lot of us who's dealt with practitioners dealing with these issues know that a lot of practitioners have either some kind of resilience to, I think, changing the discourse and incorporating the cultural discourses, but also that might just be partially be a reaction to not really feeling of lost and not really knowing how to deal with that new kind of uncertainty that, you know, have to deal with people who don't fit the fit-all model. And on the other hand, I think Pooja mentioned that when you look at the cultural sensitivity training in Hong Kong, there's been bad training material. So in some sense, it's also as in general, we don't even know how to start to do the training, where to find that information, what is it that we need to be training. So I kind of, in broad sense, want to ask kind of where is the chink in the armor in this whole issue and the experiences in different places.
I think this actually takes us very nicely to what we want to sort of spend our time discussing just before lunch, and that is sort of looking at how do we become better assessors of the needs of the people who are entering the system, right? How do we do our job better? Because we all have our respective expertises, but you know, whose needs are our services meeting, and then whose needs are we failing to meet? And then when we can't meet those needs because that's not our job, what do we know about what to do? Because what we've seen, I think, through the presentation so far is that there is this risk that people are falling away from the system rather than being helped through it. So is it because we have knowledge gaps, or is it because we have gaps in terms of expertise? And I think that question first can then sort of take us to the answers about, well, where do you start? Right? Is it in terms of education in first degrees, or is it training on the job, or refresher training ongoing while you're doing things? So maybe we can open it up and see, I mean, what some of the other experiences are in the room in terms of where you start. Yes.
Probably a related issue. Dr. Chen, in one of his slides, mentioned about the exfriend approach being extended to the domestic violence ordinance. I wonder how many cases been raised in the court since like 2008 as an exfriend, and usually who's the exfriend?
I don't have the figures, but I can probably, because even because we need to take out, say, how many cases first, and then how many of them are basically filed by the exfriend. And I can bet that it should be probably, if 4 to 6% is among those, potential cases. I mean, if in Hong Kong we have about 4,000 reported cases, or 800 something child abuse cases, I believe that less than, say, 10% would be, say, filed to apply for injunction order, and probably among this would be probably less than 1% would be using exfriend concept. So, but having said that, we need the structure first. So this is something that we do not disagree. We need the structure. We need the law. But then it's also part of the legal procedure or criminal justice procedure. We need to consider what kind of package or support service that we need to help the victims to really make use of this, legal services. So then we are not blaming any individuals, but we want to point out that unless my guess is wrong, otherwise, if we have the law in here, but not many cases are using it, then we probably need to reconsider the whole procedure, or whether we need a support service. Actually, I would consider that the criminal justice system in general is making improvement. For example, right now we have the victim support services being provided by Bảo Lãng Cục. Okay, then they provide legal advocate support for those victims, and then to help them, say, hopefully help them go through the procedure. They are not lawyers, but they are someone, say, have received relevant training. They cannot replace lawyer, but they are playing a role to provide more emotional support or some other advice to the victims, so that we hope that we can help them to go through this procedure smoothly. So that's what actually we can do to help them. But of course, it's not sufficient right now, and especially for child victims, we probably need to reconsider the whole procedure. But probably you can do this and then to examine, not just identify the few cases, but also we probably need to reach out to other victims that they haven't yet, say, used the ordinance to gain protection. Probably we need to ask them why they are not using this. So we need more research, but so sorry that we haven't done this, not just for me, but for other people. So this is something that we need to consider. Yeah.
And if I may add, every time there is violence or assault that enters the courtroom, especially in Court 1, and the judge will always have a summary, and they said, we'll give instruction by default to the prosecutors. This is family violence. I'll stand it down for a few weeks. Alternative procedure. That's all that the court will say. It means because by default, Hong Kong would not like to prosecute family members. So most of the times after 3 weeks, they come back to court and it's a binding order if there's assault. All right? But if it's just pushing and screaming and very minor, then the prosecution will probably drop the charge because family unity and harmony is more important. And then there will be instructions probably that they will have to go for some counseling. And that's about it. So that's why in Hong Kong, it's very rare family violence is ever prosecuted.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a psychologist. I used to work in a hospital, and I've encountered child abuse cases on domestic violence or potential or subtle domestic violence cases. And I've actually witnessed institutional abuse. I really appreciate the kind of integrative framework, looking not just from a micro, meso, and macro perspective. And actually, how the institution, be it the medical system or social welfare system or the legal system, further traumatize the victims. And I think it's really time for us professionals to reflect really our role in our institutions and what we can play. And I think training is one of the ways. And other than that, other than gender sensitivity and cultural sensitivity, the third one is to be sensitive to our own power. When we are in a position to make decisions, or to write report, or to make the decision have really impact on various parties, we do have to be aware that how we use our power and how we are ignorant of certain aspects and to know more about the global, better, more in-depth picture before we make a further move. So I really appreciate, looking from how we train, how we insensitize professionals, so people who have power to really look deeper into the problem and really resolve, the in-depth issues. It's not just pathologizing individuals. And actually, they use very simple, in the past days, there's a term called parentectomy, separating the parents from the child. It's an easy way out. But sometimes it adds further trauma to the child, especially with those minor child neglect case. It's not really violent, but the easy way out is to separate and then put the child into a child institution, and they grow up there and they experience further abuse. So I think awareness that there are abuses, further, more systematic, more powerful abuse on the lesser power, the powerless parties or people, and really aware how we could really reverse and make change and empower everyone.
Thank you. Yes.
I want to ask Dr. Chang, the only clarification, I need a clarification about the substance abuse first. The second one is how you think that the school can be the mechanism to disclose any form of abuses to the child and make a reporting to the public institution. How you think about it?
Well, so this is the last question on the slide, right? How can services be designed so that knowledge about risk is shared? And there's this privacy question that you raised earlier, but, you know, as counselors, lawyers, psychologists, there are things you can do as part of your services, but then you become aware of circumstances, and can you share that? The problem is there's uncertainty among the professionals as to what is the right thing or what's the proper thing to do, because you're worried about breaching ethics and this and that. But actually, the standard is very clear. The moment that there is risk or threat of risk to life or one's person, or there's a risk that a crime is about to be committed, then you know that you're entitled to breach confidentiality and report. But again, within the professions, these things aren't adequately discussed and shared. I mean, that's the broader thing I would say, and I'd be very happy for everybody sort of to add to that if you have comments. But the other thing I'd also say is, in terms of those involved with providing different services to victims and perpetrators, there isn't even sort of community sharing going on at that level. And this is where, looking at the Australian model, I thought was particularly powerful, was, you know, those in the service sector were sharing information with the police, with the hospital, so that they knew where, you know, their services were at, and what needs of the victim has been taken care of, and what the gaps remaining are. So I think there has to be multi-level sort of a lens to sort of look at this and consider who should be sort of sharing this knowledge, and where and what spaces.
Yeah, so just to butt in quickly, there are two processes that we would have to manage risk within our communities. One is a MAPA, which is a multi-agency public protection arrangements, where people like the police, like social work, like the lawyers, sit around and discuss cases at different levels. So we have MAPA 1, 2 and 3, and this is to manage the risk of serious violence by perpetrators in the community. And they have explicit information sharing protocols that have been agreed, and they are reiterated at the beginning of every multi-agency public protection arrangement meeting, so that people are very clear about how they can and cannot, and you know, they are sharing in a protected way. So some information, for example, I sit on the parole board, some information about what will happen to somebody that I release in the community will be shared from a MAPA perspective, but we will get the summary of the discussions, not the details, and much of the information is not identified as being given by anybody in particular. And we also have MARAC arrangements, which is a victim-based safety protection, which is a multi-agency risk assessment conference. And that's about risk management. And again, that is about safe sharing, because it's about sharing from education to housing. So a teacher is worried about a child that can raise an issue. It would come to the MARAC. Again, they have explicit information sharing protocols, which are agreed and enshrined in law. And they would then be coming and share with education, with housing, with schooling, with police and health. And there are ways of then making sure that the victims are safer. Within our arrangements, our prosecutor sits in the room and, in fact, has worked with the police to manage the safety of a victim who is experiencing domestic abuse, by going to previous girlfriends of that partner to say, okay, this woman is not in a position to engage with the criminal justice system at the moment, but if there are previous incidents and previous partners who will give statements, then we will use the law in that way to enact something and manage the safety. So they create a prosecution. So rather than saying it's too low level and we would want to look for the unity of the family, they would be saying, well, actually, the risks are so high that, and it's a public issue, not a private issue, that actually we, the public prosecutor in Scotland, would say, no, it's intolerable for that behaviour to be continuing. And these risks are ongoing. It's not about a partnership. And we as a society do not tolerate that behaviour. But to be fair, that's taken quite a while to get to there. But I think it's not impossible. And I think your colleague in the room was saying, to an extent, I have an echo of Gandhi in my head, that I think we have to be the change. And that's it. Encourage leaders, but also we need to be doing it ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to say something about what you said about only 4% who are actually applying for restraining orders. And I think in large part that is to do with what you said, that people who are frontline workers, in Hong Kong at least, really do not know what is going on and give victims the wrong information. I don't have a lot of evidence on this, but one of my friends ended up in a shelter the other day, and she asked me for advice, and I said, well, get a restraining order. And she said, no, because first somebody said it was not necessary, then somebody said that she already had one, then things just blurred and nobody knew what was going on. So I think training people who are frontline personnel is the most important. And this is why I wanted to ask Professor Chen, to what extent do social work studies in Hong Kong actually focus on the legal aspects of social work?
What does that mean?
To what extent do you train your social workers on the law? It's not a personal accusation, but I think that there's a real problem there.
Officially, we have say built-in at least a semester course training for all social work students. Say that's including legal knowledge. So basically, all social workers, they are required to have some basic understanding about say family or custody issues or whatever, any law related to your family or child. So basically, this is the offer. Yeah, it's required by registration. Yeah, but then I cannot really answer you if you have another concern whether it's sufficient. I would never consider this sufficient to do so. Not just mentioning about the legal knowledge, even my area, say family violence, I never consider the training for our social work student would be sufficient for them to deal with the issues. But you know, as a curriculum, we have a lot of training to cover. But the reality is that when they go to the field work and then they come put it into practice, then they will find out they have never receiving sufficient training on this. So on one hand, we need the on-job training, but on the other hand, you may say that could be the problem in our profession, that the training itself has never been sufficient to deal with the very complicated phenomenon. So that's the reality, yeah.
I just want to add, I mean, I was invited to deliver equality training to social work students as part of their course, I think, where they were covering a whole range of areas on the law. And I mean, 2 hours was absolutely insufficient. And we just got into the discussion about why is everyone entitled to equal treatment under the law, you know, on these grounds, on race, and, you know, but they're different or they're not Hong Kong. So it's very challenging. And with so much to cover, obviously that wouldn't be enough. But also we should highlight that Dr. Chan a few years ago led the only, I think, interdisciplinary course. It was an elective, but for social work students, or I think all university students, and we were sort of a multidisciplinary teaching team. So law, social work, nursing got together to deliver a course on interpersonal family violence.
We did once, but then we could make it a regular exercise. So, you know, even we are working under a lot of limitations. So we have boundaries between our faculties, kind of. So even having said that, we did make some effort to put together this kind of training, but still not. We're still working hard to make it a regular exercise or regular training for our students. So what a shame. But. Having said that, given all this limitation, we are still trying our best to do something to help at least our students to be more aware of the issues, legal or to be more gender sensitive, something like that. So we keep working on this.
I'm mindful also, we just have just short of 10 minutes, but I also want to really sort of reflect back on the questions that are up for discussion, which is really to ask those of you in the room who are frontline service providers and leading sort of the initiative, you know, what are some of the questions we've got in terms of process or the service gaps? Is there anybody who'd like to sort of reflect on that or share? Because this is one of the part of the problems, right? So you'll have academics say their things, and then, you know, there's a bridging exercise, and part of the conversation has to be had with people who are on the ground and delivering. And it's really rare to have an opportunity. And so we're really hoping that you'll engage and, sort of help us complete the picture. Niru, yes?
I actually have a question. I don't have an answer to your question. Related to the points that both of you made about sharing of information among the frontline and the service providers, I have two questions. One is related to your study. What is the first port of call for most of these victims? Is it the police? Is it the social workers? Is it an NGO? And the second question is, and particularly for ethnic minority women, and the second question is, how many of the cases where the police were called in, did a social worker or somebody else have knowledge of the issue? Do you have any findings from your research on this?
So I think it's a fallacy to think of it as the cases being that a victim would have one place as a port of call, because as we know, it depends on how you're situated and located in your context where you will turn to when you need help. And as I said, a lot of these women were first turning to their friends and community, and only after experiencing several years of violence, when it got extreme, did they reach out. But a lot of these cases came out of general approaches made to community service providers on education or some form of retraining, or sort of taking the kids to tutorial classes in service providers for ethnic minorities, where the violence later came to light. So none of them, in fact, were dedicated shelters providing services to victims of domestic violence, except one. So that's sort of the one instance in which the woman knew exactly where to go. They do call on police if they are that desperate. But again, the cases are few and far between, because when they have had an experience and they call the police, their first encounter was not positive, and so after that they gave up, and then sort of the violence resurfaced several years later when they were working with people. As I also mentioned in the slide, none of them talked about violence when they went to the hospital to receive treatment for their injuries, and they were not asked, how did you get these injuries? There was no suspicion. So clearly there's the sense that, well, if she had this problem, she would say something. And I want to say, well, we need to debunk that. I don't think that's the reality. And the second thing is, clearly if she had a problem, she would know where to go. No, she may not know where to go. And then clearly if she had a problem, this is the place she should go. That may not be the place she will go. And so, in fact, at the 5th seminar in Melbourne, one of the primary sort of themes that came out of discussion was this concept of the no wrong door policy. And I think that's sort of emerging out of our discussion here, where all of us need to know what advice to give, even though that's not our job. And as Edward said, we won't be handling the case of domestic violence, but we need to know where to send these women to so that they can reliably be dealt with and have all their concerns addressed and be protected against risk of future violence. So that's called the no wrong door policy. So no matter where you show up, whether it comes through at school or at the hospital, people know what to do and tell you the right thing to do. So again, addressing also what Esther said, nobody should be in a situation where you say, oh, I don't know what to do, maybe I'll call up so-and-so. So a reliable source of consistent messages and information. And I think all of it needs to come down to the message that we have a zero tolerance policy for violence. Yes.
So probably as a frontline service provider, we can share some of our experience. Me and my colleague Jessica is from NGO Pathfinders, and we help migrant workers who are pregnant or have children born in Hong Kong. Some of them experience domestic violence, and the some of the situation that we face is we had one client that she was facing the violence situation, and the shelter we refer her to stay in a domestic violence shelter, and then she found it really inconvenient. The school that the children are going is far away from the shelter. She doesn't have money to do the transportation. We pay for the allowance, but without our intervention, how would she be able to go into that shelter? And also, the shelter do provide cooking materials, that she can cook her own food, but then the food are very Chinese food, but then she doesn't, the type of food that she's eating, she's not eating pork, she's eating a certain food, and in different time as the Chinese. So it made her feel very inconvenient, that she ultimately decided to go back to the family and stay with the husband. That's one issue. And the domestic violence shelter do provide counseling, very good counseling for probably local women, but then because of the cultural issue and language, that agency cannot provide counseling to our client, and we are not specialized in domestic violence, so it would be quite difficult and challenging for our social worker to step into that place and provide family type counseling as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also we also experience that shelter request our clients to go to IFSC before go to the shelter. They said they do not really take care of the case for long term, so they need someone to actually handle this DV case before they can take the case. They worry a lot of no one take care of the case. Yes, some migrant workers, they are out of the services. And so, what to do? And it is so difficult for them. So I really feel they don't have sensibility. My clients find it super difficult that you limit myself, not bringing my children to the kitchen. Who take care of my children then? So how? So it is so difficult. They only suggest that you buy your own food, and she doesn't have money. She only have food coupon.
Yeah, well, this is very reflective of some of the things that were emerging out of these interviews as well, that shelters would not even be sensitive to dietary requirements and say, well, you should be glad we're giving you food. And so if it's beef or pork or whatever it may be, this is what it is. And I think what Jessica just said about, well, if you don't like it, you can buy your own food. I mean, again, the insensitivity there is just, very, very glaring. But also, I think going back to what you said, that you would pass the buck sometimes. And this is something that ethnic minority and immigrant women often face because their situation is so uncertain. Not only do they not know what their immigration status means for everybody, but even service providers have this big question mark of where in the system do they fit? Who do they go to? And so you'll be sent to the Integrated Family Services Center, who will say, well, you can go to the shelter. And then the shelter says, well, you can only stay here for a limited period of time. Or you have 4 children, we have no room for all of you. So maybe I'll find you somewhere else. And after this ping pong rally, which is literally what it is, I mean, one of the women I interviewed had on a 24-hour period visited seven different agencies that she was told could help her, and eventually went back to the abuser because none of them were able to take her in. So there is this sense of, well, where do you fit? And that's part of the problem. We are designed to put people somewhere. And we fail to think about, well, there needs to be a better system to map out taking care of their needs. And is there a way to park them somewhere first? Take care of their safety first. And then, of course, deal with, I know there are institutional and system issues that need to be addressed. But it's this is not my job, this is not my role, we can't help you, maybe so-and-so can. That's a lot of the messages that the women are getting. So it's not surprising to me that many of the high-risk repeat violence victims are choosing to go back to the perpetrators.
If I may add, that's why the lawyers are very practical in these matters. If I may ask, somebody comes to me like that, and I will tell them, let's file for divorce, let's get your interim monthly allowances, and let's make sure your husband cannot step into the matrimonial home.
A lot of these women don't have money, don't qualify for legal aid for some reason. I mean, the majority
of you are qualified for legal aid if you cannot afford anything.
Yeah, but I'm a social worker. I really appreciate the question that how much training do we have? We we don't really know much about the legal side. And I don't know whether we have social welfare department representative here to discuss the issue.
This is so one who signed up. I'm not sure if they're here, but I'll leave them to self-identify.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate. And yes, I didn't know about injunction order after I finally aware from other colleagues' case. Okay, that is injunction order. So really, I think it is important to train at least social workers if we believe we are the first person, very often, to deal with the case. So I hope, the multidisciplinary training, something like that, can be more often and open to even graduates. That would be very good.
Yes, sure. Thank you. I'm social worker too, and one of the service provider in the NGOs. Our is a crisis center to deal with domestic victims, sexual abuse, just like. One point I want to share is I agree with the speaker that the cultural sensitivity is very important, because from day one I work in my center. Maybe I need more to equip myself, and through the working experience, I realized that we need to aware every moment when I encounter different race, maybe sexual orientation, different types of people, so that I think the training in the university is important, but the more important is that in-job training and share with different discipline and colleagues is more important in the on-job training, because we need to improve ourselves. Just one example in our agency is maybe in the early stage we did not well, but we realized that the ethnic minorities women cannot eat pork. We need to separate. We separate kind of cooking utilities for them, cook the halal food, and in the community there are some food banks for them to buy their food, just suitable for them. So I think we need more platform to share what the practice wisdom. Maybe it's little, small step, but it's very important. Another I want to feedback is that the injunction order, it is very difficult for our movement, not only for the EM and for local people, is also because maybe the knowledge we have, maybe the culture, some consideration. But I want to raise, I'm sure that people may think that for safety, maybe you go to shelter first for your safety, so that people may ignore, or maybe some women do not want to corner their partner so harshly. So it's really related to our culture. It's need our hard working on the education. That's my reflection.
I just am mindful of the time and note that we need to break for lunch. But also, I think what we're hearing is that there is a readiness to understand more, and a need. There's a recognition that there are gaps that need to be addressed. And one of the things that came through in the study, for example, was that social workers were saying, we don't have time. We're so hard worked. And it's true, right? You have so many cases. You have to put in the numbers. When do you do this? And I think
this is not an excuse.
It's not an excuse. Absolutely not.
Not an excuse. Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. And so if you have ideas, because you have knowledge about where your sharing happens the most, what are the appropriate platforms and avenues, and what is the level of receptivity, right? And I think these things can be arranged, but only in partnership. It can't be done top-down. It has to be done as a partnership across different disciplines. So we're very open, and if you have ideas, please do put them forward. The last thing I just want to say before we close for the morning session is, I think we have to be careful when we talk about culture, because culture has this way of becoming the monster in the room, or having people sort of say, but why do we have to deal with it? And I think we have to recognize what we're talking about is culture in a very broad sense, in the way of lived experiences or realities. So sexuality and your other identities as a mother, as an immigrant, ethnicity is just a small part of it. So we're not talking about culture in the racial, ethnic sense. And I think it's really important to bear that in mind, because otherwise we will get dragged into this other discourse about multiculturalism and, why should the law look at culture? That's not what is being, what we're talking about at all. It's about mapping, capacities based on your identities and the fact that you are many people at one time, and how all of those identities affect your needs and your receptivity to different interventions to help victims and perpetrators. So I just want to put that out there on the table. Thank you to all our speakers. I'd like to invite you all to have lunch on the first floor podium level. Everyone is welcome. And then we'll reconvene back here at 2:10 to pick up. All right? Thank you once again.